Hey, it's Clay. Welcome to another video. I received a question from a viewer named Tim. So first of all, thanks a lot, Tim, for sending your question. I really appreciate it. And I thought it was an interesting question and worth a video. What we're going to talk about today is implementing negative feedback into a Epiphone Valve Junior. This is an amp that I started on, so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. And negative feedback is a great mod. It's one of the best ways to really change the tone of your amplifier. And there are a lot of really classic circuits that implement negative feedback in great ways. So I think this is an excellent idea for this project. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about negative feedback. Let's take a look at the original Epiphone Valve Junior circuit. As you can see, here's our speaker output here. Here's the ground. Here's the primary. I'm sorry, the hot wire of the secondary going to the speaker. There is nothing coming out of here. And so there is no negative feedback in the circuit anywhere that I can tell. No internal negative feedback on any of the triodes or anything like that. It's just a pretty straightforward, simple amp. So first of all, I think let's try to get a little inspiration and see how some of the great circuits of the past have implemented negative feedback and maybe give us some ideas on how we can use it. So what I want you to direct your attention to, this here TR2 is the output transformer. And this little black dot here is we're on the secondary side, so the signal has come in from the plate of this 6v6, the output into here. Here's our primary, goes through the transformer, comes out the secondary side, and then this is our speaker. Now this wire right here runs right through here through this 2700 ohm 2.7k resistor, and then is inserted back here. Okay, so this is at the cathode of the V2. It's probably V1B 12AX7 triode gain stage. You can see here's our 1.5K bias resistor, here's our cathode bypass capacitor, and then they inserted here at the bottom of that connection and then run a 47 ohm resistor to ground. So this is, I think, a pretty simple and straightforward implementation of negative feedback, which, the Blackface Vibrochamp is a very classic sounding amplifier and would certainly sound different than an Epiphone Valve Junior. So if you're looking to move it more in that direction, this is a good place to start. Some of the interesting notes here is because it's inserted at this point, right? So we've got the output from the speaker. What negative feedback is essentially doing is it's taking the primary part of the signal and it's inserting it negatively, meaning backwards, feeding back into the circuit. So it's really kind of, the input from the guitar comes in here, it runs through all this circuit, and then a portion of it, a small portion of it, is allowed to come back in. And so that really has the result of reducing some gain, increasing some headroom, and really kind of flattening out the frequency response to be a little bit more even. So some of that can be a really good thing. Interesting here as well, inserting it at this point, so we're a little bit later, kind of towards the end of the preamp, and there are other amps that will insert it at different locations, and that will definitely impact the sound that you use. So just kind of one way it has been done, shown right here. Now the next thing I want to discuss is that when you're inserting it into this gain stage, you have a cathode bypass capacitor, and so you can't put it back here at the top, because if it goes through the cathode bypass cap, it's all going to get sucked to ground. So that's kind of why they do it this way, where you've got a typical 25 UF cathode bypass cap, 1.5K bias resistor. That's very standard. You can see that same setup over here at V1A, but then they insert it here at the end of that and then run a 47 ohm resistor, which is a very, very small amount of resistance, just so that you can insert the negative feedback into that location. Let's move forward and take a look at the Deluxe Reverb AB763, probably the most famous implementation of negative feedback. Again, looking here at TR3, this is our output transformer. We are tapping off of this line. Running over here, we've got an 820 ohm resistor, and it's actually running into here, to this location, which is inserting it right at the very, very end of the preamp, where it runs into the phase inverter. So a different location, right? If it would be the same location as the Vibrochamp, it would be kind of in this spot on this second, or I guess It's hard to one of these later triodes here in the preamp, but we're actually hearing the phase inverter. Next, I want to put your attention that we've got an 820 ohm resistor as compared to a 2700 ohm, so smaller amount of resistance. Now with negative feedback, it's a little bit backwards. As you increase resistance, you are decreasing the amount of negative feedback. So if you use a very high valued resistor, you will essentially have zero negative feedback. And think of it like this, right? So you're allowing the signal that's coming out to be bled away from the speaker. If you introduce a heavy amount of resistance, you're actually going to be very much impeding that bleed off, and it's all just going to go out to the speaker. So if you introduce a lower amount of resistance, that means more of the signal is going to bleed away and be fed back. So you're going to have a stronger effect if you use a lower valued resistor. A third and final implementation I want to bring up, and this is probably my favorite. This is from Rob Robert's website, all credit going to him. This is his very famous three-way negative feedback switch, which is a very very smart and well implemented use of negative feedback. Now he uses instead of using a fixed amount of resistance like these previous two circuits, he actually allows for some variance by using a three-way switch. Now he uses an on-off-on switch, which is correcting. I had it wrong. It's an on-off-on. So again, this is the 5v3, and I bring this up for you, Tim, because I think this is a great example of how to implement negative feedback into a circuit that does not have it typically. So again, we're tapping off the output, right? The leg that is going to the output transformer to the speaker. Here we're running a wire, and he runs it right here into this location. This is the very first V1A triode. So this is a different location that he has putting the negative feedback in. And if you look again, we're at the cathode of this 12AX7 triode. Now he implements a three-way switch. Now the cathode is always going to have this bias resistor running to ground. And that's essential because if you don't have a bias resistor, you're not going to have a functioning cathode here. What the three-way switch does is it allows you to select between three different selections. So the first would be a normal 5v3. That's this bottom rung right here where you are using the cathode bypass capacitor. Okay, so that's going to be the highest amount of gain because you are having cathode bypass, which increases gain quite a bit, and you're having zero negative feedback, which again, negative feedback decreases gain. So this is your hottest preamp setting. Setting number 2 is no bypass capacitor, no negative feedback. So again, that's where you're using a on-off-on switch. And then for number 3, you are using no bypass capacitor and also adding a 56K negative feedback resistor. So you're really going from highest gain, medium gain, lowest gain, with the negative feedback also adding kind of a difference in tone and feel for adding the negative feedback. And I personally would choose to use this implementation when you're putting this into your amp, just because I think Rob's explanations are very, very excellent and very useful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about a couple other things. So I answered this question. I would recommend an on-off-on switch, just like Rob does. Yes, for wiring you can recycle, you can use normal wire. Typical wire is I think about 22 gauge. That would work fine here. You still have the large wire gauge running out to the speaker. We're just bleeding off a small portion of the circuit back into the amplifier. So you don't need to have a tremendously large speaker wire. Then let's talk about this question. This is interesting. So the question is really about the different taps, right? You've got 4, 8, 16 ohm output taps, and then you've got different amounts of resistance, right? 2.7K, 820, and then Rob, I think, uses 56K. So how do we know which one of these we use? Well, it really depends on what kind of tap you're using, because using a different ohm output tap will change how it interacts with your resistor. So refer to this grid right here. This is very helpful. You can see if you're using a 4, 8, or 16 ohm, then this 39K, 56K, 75K would be produce the same amount of resistance. And you only want to pick one of them. You do not need to put, if you read this paragraph right here. So if you have multiple outputs, just pick one, because your amplifier is always going to be sending signal to those outputs, even if the speaker is not connected. And so the negative feedback will still function even if you put the negative feedback on an 8 ohm tap, but you're using the 16 ohm tap for the speaker. The circuit will still send the negative feedback through the 8 ohm tap, so you'll be fine there. So these three values here produce the same amount of light feedback depending on its given tap. Okay, and then this is moderate, this is heavy. So again, using a smaller valued resistor means you're presenting less resistance, so more signal is being bled back in. So refer to this tab, to this chart, and use this to help you determine what value resistor you want to use with your circuit. Now the last comment I want to make is I read through this comment about the Epiphone Valve Junior, and this is really about implementing it into your circuit. Now I wasn't exactly following this just because I don't have an Epiphone Valve Junior in front of me, and I know there are different types of schematics, and this one is hard to read, and this one references a JP1 junction. I guess for me personally, I really prefer Rob's implementation. He's got some nice diagrams here for how you would do this, and now this is working with a 5E3 with a component board though, so that is definitely going to be different than your implementation on a PCB. So what I would recommend is referring to this diagram. I think that our friend here, Mr. Twang, inserts negative feedback here at this location, V1B, and that is perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable to do. Just so then you've got C3, R9, those are really the ones in play. Now the question that am not certain about is where is your output transformer output tap? And I guess if it were me, I would just go to the output jack and pull off of there, right? So at the back of the Epiphone Valve Junior, I believe it has 3 separate output taps, 4, 8, 16 ohm. I would just take the negative feedback off of the output of one of those taps. That would be my preference and choice. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. If any of you else are trying to implement negative feedback, I hope this was helpful for you as well. So please leave more comments down below, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks. Bye.